start, right? Okay, so welcome back. My first question, I had actually listed down 4 and 5 exercises. Who actually went and did it? Raise their hand. All right, Neeraj, that's great. Ritesh, what happened?
Partially. I mean, not
Huh?
fully, but I did almost all of it, but not I. I think I did not complete it.
Okay, what about you, Ashish?
Yeah, even I tried, I did some, but not all. So I didn't raise hand. So I
Okay.
started the initial part.
All right, so I can't tell it to anyone else, but you guys are part of my team, so you can't say you did partial exercises, okay? 1 week was enough. It was not too much. Let's make sure you do that. You want to get away from the VRE stuff, start writing C sharp. You need to get good at it first, all right? So let's sort of quickly recap. I'm going to join Zoom from my computer and all right. So I'll just quickly recap, right, where we started from. That is, hey, this is a very common problem. We have some numbers and we need to find, say, even numbers. And we took that, we turned it into just a function. Then we realized that we are writing very similar looking function. And then we talked about, hey, sort of uh, this the code has the mechanic of looping and mechanic of filtering. So then we said, okay, what if we can pass a function and create a general purpose function, right? And then we learned about delegate, right? And how they are very similar to any other type you are familiar with, that is class, struct, or interface, right? Um, then then we talked about lambda expression, which is basically a short form way of writing a delegate. And there, the key inside is type inference. Type inference is what makes this possible, right? So we talked about that, right? A very powerful concept, right? And I'm always amazed at those C# compiler writers that they are able to do type inference. I don't even know where I would begin if I had to solve that problem. So that's pretty amazing to me. Then we sort of talked about extension method, where it just gives us a more fluent syntax. And then we talked about generics, right? And we talked about how you can have action T delegates, func T delegates, and then we try to represent that as in a generic way, right? And we sort of ended up with this method, which takes T instead of integer, correct? And then finally, we sort of stopped here. That is, we can remove the limitation of list and we can go into the notion of IEnumerable. That basically represents a string. We will take a filter function and return another IEnumerable from the first IEnumerable by applying the filter, right? And as I was mentioning to you guys, right, this is basically same as a where method conceptually, right? They will not write where method in this fashion, they as in the C# guys, right? But this is what it essentially does. And another fun exercise if you want to see is all the source code for base class library is open source. You can actually see how C# guys will write the where function. So I would love to hear back next week from someone and say, oh, that was pretty cool. Because actually, if you look at it, you will find their where method implementation quite interesting. Um, so I think with the recap done, right, what we want to talk about is we will try to write 2 more Linq methods, okay? And I think that will help us solidify the concept as to what's going on, right? So there, we will take up the very simplest example of the select method. You all have used it. So how do we implement the select method, right? So let's obviously make it a static method, right? It will return an enumerable. We'll say Linq select, right? And it has to take something, right? So now can someone tell me what would the signature of this Linq select method will look like? So first question would be, does this method have to be a generic method? Yes or no?
Yes, I mean, it has to be.
It has to be generic, obviously. Okay, now that's simple, but let me ask you another interesting question. For this generic method, how many type parameters are we going to need?
Just one.
Okay, so let me ask you this. You guys all know Linq, right? So you can say numbers, and then you say select, right? Now I can produce
You need a input parameter and output parameter, right? So 2, maybe.
yes. You need 2 type parameters. And let me articulate as to why, right? You can take an n and you can return double it. So you took an I enumerable of int, and you still got I enumerable of int in return, right? But is this the only thing you can do? Well, not necessarily, because I could do something like numbers dot select, right? And hypothetically, imagine, if you will, there is a person class which takes an integer. I can do that, right? So what I did was I took an I enumerable of integer, and I'm returning an I enumerable of person. Makes sense? So if you think about it, for select method, there are 2 types at play, right? The first one is the type of the input I enumerable, and second one be the type of output I enumerable. Make sense? And the way you define a generic method, and this is where I wanted you guys to, I gave that exercise of writing the generic classes and method for you to understand the syntax around it, right? So we will say, hey, I have, say, something called a source type, right? And I have something called a target type, right? So one thing about generic type is, in the definition first, you have to define the types. And again, they can be named, okay? So I don't know if you think that this, you have to use the word T. It's not necessarily true. It's just a name of the generic type, right? It's a little bit of mind bending, but it's the name. So I can actually make it like X everywhere, and that's fine. Because it just says, hey, there is a type called X. I don't know what it is, but it will come in, okay? The convention is to put T, especially for a generic method just takes the one parameter, right? So, but it's not necessarily you put that. And that's where, if you look at the dictionary definition, I'm sure you all have used the generic dictionary, right? It will say T key. I mean, you will say string and say string, right? But if you look at the definition of this guy, they name it as T key and T value. That is type of key and type of value. Okay, so I hope that helped in terms of what's going on. So now that we name T source and T target, right? What will be the return type here? What do I put here? Can someone say that?
That should be T target.
Exactly, that should be T target. What will we take? What will I put here?
Source, T source.
Right? So now we have started sort of sketching out what it's going to look like, right? I'm going to take an enumerable of T source, and I'm going to return an enumerable of T target. Right? Now, the second part is the interesting part. So what will I take here? Can someone tell me what would I put here?
It has to be a function which takes a single T source and returns a single T target.
Perfect. Well done, Ritesh. So to go back to the previous lesson, where's the generics lesson? I thought I had a big notes up top on generics. Yeah. So remember when we talked about generics, right? We said either it can be action, which is always void, or it could be func, that is, it will take something and return something. Right? So in our case, func is more suitable, correct? And it sort of makes sense that we will define a func which will be T source and T result. Right? Because that function will basically take an input, one single input of T source type, and return a one single output of T source type. So let's put that. We'll call it a map, sort of a standard thing. Let me just make this a little smaller so the whole thing fits here. Oh, we have to name this time. So I'm going to take a pause here. And I want to make sure everyone is able to understand this definition of the function first. So if you don't fully understand, raise your hand and speak up, because none of these things we're going to cover is going to make sense if this method definition doesn't make sense.
I'm not very sure about the second parameter. So if you could take an example for that.
Second parameter as in this?
Yeah, how exactly it would work.
Okay, so let me flip the question on you. How does this make sense? Does this, the filter example make sense?
Yeah.
So what is that filter func? It takes a T and returns O, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And that's what we need because we want to put that bool into if.
Okay.
But if I want to take an integer and return a person, right? And that is the beauty of generics. I can actually define generics. I don't know what would be the right technical term, but it's like recursive, right? I can say, you know, I don't even know the type of the T at this time, or I can know one of the T. So let me tell you how func is defined, right? So the way the generic are defined are like this. That is the definition of func that we are trying to use here. I'll just say funcx because it will clash with the existing name. Let me take a step back. Let's say we actually write a function which takes an integer and returns a person, okay? So public person get person from integer I. Okay, now let's take another one that says get double, which will basically do okay. So let's talk about this guy. Are these two methods clear? Get person from integer and get double. So what can we do to express that as a delegate? So let's take a very primitive example that non-generic version is very obvious to you, right? You will write a integer to person delegate, right? Is going to take integer. Agree? Do you agree that this delegate can represent this function?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can try to write a delegate for this guy, right? So public delegate integer, double int delegate, input I. Do you agree? So now, let's look them together, right? There is a single input and different type. So I can write a basic, the first order of generic, and you can say public delegate T result, because this remains the same, but I want to be able to represent this in a generic way. So I'll say T result, and I'll say integer to X. Now I have to put the T result here right next to the name to signify what it means. Oops. And I'll create a first level generic. That is, it takes an integer and returns a value of type T result. Now, would you agree that this generic definition covers both of these guys? Yes? But then we can take it for a step further. X to Y. We can say, hey, Tx, Ty, Tx input, Ty, oh, you don't have to put Ty because that's gonna get returned here. Correct? Well, that's what func is. It will specify two type parameters, and you have to use those somewhere. So you use T for the input, and you use T result for the output. Right? So that is why in the exercise I had asked you guys, like, why do we say T result at the end? Right? If you look at every single func, T result is always at the end. Why is that? Why is it not the first one? So let's write the second. So we will then say, hey, T1, T2, T result, T1, T2. What is it complaining? Oh. Are you able to read this definition of a generic delegate, that it takes input 1 of type T1, input 2 of type T2, and it returns object of type T result? So the key part to understand here is what is inside the bracket is the placeholder for the type. And then you use it somewhere in your definition. So for example, if I were to define my own Q class, I will.
Hey, sorry, JD, can I ask a quick question here?
Yeah.
So in your public delegate func x2, for example, just as an example. So what's the point or the need for the type information after func x2? So like, it seems to me like that's redundant, right? It's like, well, you tell it the return type and T result, and then you tell it what the inputs are. So why reiterate that stuff after func x2?
Right. So I think, delegate syntax is probably not intuitive, and that is why I was going to that, because I can feel the crickets in the online session. Let's say you had to write a generic Q class. How would you write it? Let's just first do Q, write a Q class, right? And let's say if it's we'll call it integer Q. And inside of it, now let's not even do this, right? Let's do a list. And sorry, I'll have to now improvise on the spot. I haven't prepared this, so. Right? And then you can have a NQ method and PQ method. Actually, let's write it. Does this make sense, this very simple integer Q? Yeah? Now let's turn this specific integer Q into generate queue. So I can say, hey, all this int need to be replaced with a t. Agree? So let's replace that. T, 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 T. Agree? But then compiler is like, what is T? That is why after the class, you have to tell it that the T will come. I don't know it yet, but it will come. And then compiler is like, okay, that's cool. So the generic type information has to go like this, inside 2 brackets. And that is what helps compiler decide what goes on. And then you can, you can put sort of restriction where you say T is I, X, or there's some type and all that. And that is where you have to specify the name of your generic type parameter somewhere. So don't think there's a T. Think of it as a name of generic type that you want to use. So I want to pause here and want to make sure everyone understood this part. That is, how do you take a class which is not generic and turn it into a generic class?
JD, I was just going to add, oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to add, right, I think the previous question about the T result, right, I think you may want to extend the second example to use 2 parameters, right, of like a T and a T result, and maybe show like a T result being constructed. Would that be kind of getting more to that question? Because I think right now you're using the same template parameter for the input and output, right? And I guess it doesn't really show much of that line 66 kind of where there's 2 template parameters of the T result.
I'll come to that. I'll come to that. Don't worry about that. I'll break the funk down. I want to make sure if everyone agrees to this generic queue class structure I put together, and they have 0 doubt in their mind what happened here, then we will easily break down the delegate part. So is everyone absolutely crystal clear that the QT class makes complete sense to them? Todd?
I'm nodding, but I'll say yes as well.
All right, thank you. Please say it because I can't see. I have my link pad everywhere. Okay. Now you may ask, like, why is this angle brackets there? Right? Have you ever wondered why it's angle brackets and not something else? The first time you saw, first time you used the list integer, did you ever wonder why it's angle brackets? Right? So now there is no particular reason why it's angle bracket, but you have to come up with a syntax. So they said, we will use the angle bracket syntax with the T. And when I instantiate the Q, I will put the actual type. And then integer, T got replaced by integer, right? So you sort of took the usage very intuitively. List of int, you just literally read it like that. But someone had to write that class and you need syntax for that, and that is this syntax. you have to put the types that you want to take in a generic fashion inside of an angle bracket. So I hope that helped further, Todd, in terms of what you're asking. So now, let's remove this, right? Remember I was telling you there is no difference between a class and a delegate, right? We both are type system. You say public. Let me write it up here. You say public, just like that integer Q class, right? Now you could write struct to specify the type of the type you are defining. So in this case, you will say delegate, right? Similar to how you might say public struct, right? Then what do we have? Name. So I'll say my delegate name. Right? And now I need to specify definition. The only nuance is that when it comes to a delegate, they sort of borrow from the definition of a function. So you have to specify the return type, and then you specify input types. And that is the definition. Versus this one is very clean. Public, class, integer Q, opening brace, closing brace, and you specify the definition. Imagine, if you will, that they came up with this syntax for defining a delegate. Sorry, bear with me. This is all, I'm going off script, so. Imagine if they came up with this syntax. Right? But then you have to add more syntax. What if I have multiple parameters? You know. So there they said, you know what, let's keep the function definition that you're used to as is, and you'll put delegate as a type and put the name, and that's how you specify a delegate. Right? So if I wanted to write, and let's make this integer here. Now, if I wanted to write this function in a generic fashion, right? I have two types here, integer and integer. In this case, it's string. Let's make it string. So this is a perfectly valid non-generic delegate. It takes an integer, returns a string, and it can represent every single function out there that takes an integer and returns a string. Agree? Let's turn this into generic. Now, we'll look at this example. We need to put T, okay? So I have one T here, I have one T here. So let's put that T result, right? My delegate name, right? And put T input, let's say. Just like compiler complain when you just put T here, because it expects this to know that it's a generic. So I have to do the same thing for here. And now, I have a func. The most primitive func is exactly like this. Does this make sense? Yay, nay, someone say something. I don't know what the silence means right now.
Yep, what
Yeah.
did I?
Yeah, makes sense.
All right. So now, does this make sense?
Yep.
The definition of link select that I wrote here, is it absolutely crystal clear to everyone?
Yep.
Is it this like an artifact in what you're writing, or is there some significance of needing to write this in front of the I enumerable?
We say that again?
So in the first argument, you have a this I enumerable, right? And the second one, you just have func. Is there something special about it, like being local, just as like an aside, or should it just be I enumerable?
So that's the syntax for the extension method. So guys,
Oh,
what
okay.
I'm feeling that, no one opened the 9 link pad script I sent. No one really tried anything. And it's a little disappointing, I will be honest, right? Because if your thought process is, hey, I'm going to sit and listen, and yes, you will get conceptually, but you will never be able to become good at these things, because I'm skipping over a lot of nuances, because I can't go into every nuance. Only way to get good at this is practicing. And this is a perfect canvas I'm giving you to practice in isolation to understand what's going on.
Yeah, no, I was asking because I was reading about the extension methods, and they talked about how they need to be in the same namespace. That was kind of the part that I got out of it, but I guess they didn't specify that when they are in the same namespace that you just have to use this to refer it. Because I was going to ask the next question of why this is not in the same namespace kind of thing in the definition, but I guess that's probably more of a detail I get of the C# separate knowledge.
Right, and the namespace actually don't really matter. And I'm glad you're bringing that up, right? And that is what I mean, that what you really want to do is every single link pad script, you want to tweak and ask question. In C#, every character matters. Every single character matters. You get it one off and the program is not going to run. So please, I think it will be more productive, and you will actually come up with the more interesting question. You're like, hey, what about this nuance? And I want to be able to help you cover the nuances. So let's try to go to that repository and look at the samples, all right?
Okay, yeah, I'll practice, I guess, these specific ones then.
Yep. All right, but now going back, is the definition of select crystal clear to everyone? So if it's still not clear, please tell me. I would rather spend more time on this, make sure it's crystal clear before I continue.
Yeah, it's not clear for me, JD, but again, I probably have the least amount of experience with this stuff as everybody, so I wouldn't hold it up just because of me.
Okay, that's fair. That's very kind of you, Alan. Anyone else? Okay, I will take the silence as a firm yes. So now, how do we implement this? Anyone has any idea how to implement this?
This will be a simpler thing. We'll apply a for each loop, and then in the while yielding, you just call the function and yield that value.
Exactly. Thanks, Ritesh. So we will go through every item in the source. And unlike the previous filter version that you see up here, that you yield what returns a true, here you will simply call the function and return that. And that's your select, essentially. Yes? So let's try it out. We will go here. And rerun it. Not what I wanted to see. What am I missing? Oh, I can't do dump because it just puts out the object. Okay. I'll have to do something like this. Make sense? So select method is also called projection, right? You're projecting from one sequence of enumerable to another sequence of enumerable. So you will see that term. So I thought I'll mention. But yes, essentially, the select method is as simple as this. And remember, I don't know if you spend time on understanding the yield return, they developed this feature so that you can do Linq easily on top. Because otherwise, imagine how you would do this without yield return. It'll be a lot of code. Okay, so it is an absolutely brilliant design when you come down to it. Everything is defined at the right layer, and then you assemble the layers and you get something really, really great. So I'll take a pause here. Does the select method make sense to everyone? Yes? All right, perfect. Now, we will try to write one more. I want to get rid of this. Everyone has used first or default and single or default methods? Yes? Can someone tell me the difference between first or default and single or default? Has no one used first or default, single or default?
I've used first or default. It returns the
Yeah.
So it returns the first value that it finds, but I'm not sure about single or default.
Okay. Dookie, you must have used it because I see it in your code all the time.
Yeah, I use first or default usually. I think single. I think single expects there to be a value or something like that. I forget the difference.
Okay.
Well, if you use single, it will barf if there's more than, well, if there's more than one, right?
Yes, exactly right. First says that in a sequence, give me the first element. And if you say first or default, it says give me the first element. And if the sequence is empty, give me the default value. That's why it's called first or default. Single or default says, if the sequence is empty, give me the default value. If sequence has one value, give me that single value. But if sequence has more than one value, then throw an exception. So it's a very subtle difference. And you have to always consciously think whether you want to do first or default or single or default. It sort of expresses the constraint in your business domain. Am I expecting only one value in the stream? Then you should use single or default. Or from the stream, I don't care, just give me the first one. Then use that. And generally speaking, if you use first or default, you should think about it. It's a funny business. There are very few use cases where first or default actually makes sense. It should be more single or default.
That's interesting. I feel like I almost never use single or default just because it's like, if that could happen, I would want to check for it explicitly versus just have some built-in logic to just throw if it finds multiple. It just seems really unintuitive to me.
But think about it, right? Tell me right now a use case where you are like, give me the first element of the string or a default value, and I will do something with it. What kind of use cases are valid for that? If you have a stream of T, why do you only care about the first?
Yeah, like say you have like a bunch of securities, like a bunch of IBM records, and I want, for whatever reason, I want to get like the GICS record or the GICS value for IBM. So it's like, look, I don't care which one, just find me an IBM and get me its GICS, and that will be just fine.
Okay, but then what if there are different IBM records and they have different GICS? What I'm trying to say is, most of the time, it does not solve the kind of problems we want to solve. Because you are then assuming something about the stream, which is very unlikely, at least in the problems that we solve, will be true. You wanna, if you really wanted GICS for an IBM ticker, you better make sure each of the IBM tickers have the same GICS. Does that make sense? Anyway, it's a
well, okay. So like how about give me an example then to turn it around. Give me an example of where you would use single or default and want it to want your checking for the unexpected case of multiple records in a sequence. You'd want that to barf when you call a single.
Let's say I have a list of, right now we are just doing this activity migration where I have 10 activity configuration objects, and when I'm starting and I get a message from, say, platform X, I want to find the single configuration object for platform X from the list of configuration objects I have. I don't even use single or default, actually. I mostly use single. If I'm expecting a single value, I want to use single. And the thing is, single function actually takes a predicate, saying from this I enumerable, find me a single value which satisfies this filter criteria. So when I say predicate, it's like take an input and returns a true and false. So there are tons of cases you will have where single is meaningful. That I have an I enumerable. I want a particular record based on this criteria.
Then you kind of have to assume that, you know, whatever you're passing in as the predicate will have a single value, right? How do you know that?
No, that is exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying I am enforcing. I want to make sure there is only single value. So in case there is more than one value, it's a problem for me.
No. What I'm saying is, if there's no value, then if there's no value in that scenario, you still have problems, right?
Yes. So that is why you have to be so conscious in making those choices. If I really expect exactly one value, I'm going to use single, because I want system to throw an exception if it is 0 or if it is more than 1. But there could be a scenario where I'm like, hey, give me a single value, and if not, give me a default value, don't throw an exception. Then I will use single or default. And that is your job, and that is where every line of code you write needs to express the domain and the constraint that you're trying to solve for. And when you just willy-nilly pick any function to get something done, that's when system breaks, when anything unexpected happens. That is why software is hard, right? If you want single, you better write single. And then program will ensure that. And that is why I'm saying next time you use first or default, really think about it. Does it really make sense to you first or default? I hardly use it, because I just don't run into a problem where first or default is a meaningful construct.
I'm not sure if that's, sorry. I'm not sure if that solves Todd's example though, because the example is if you filter something, you filter an IO numeral, you get a bunch of results back, and you know all of those results, there's a property that has the same value. So you say, let's get first or default and get that property or whatever. How else would you do that? You know?
And that's fair, right? And that is where I would question the whole data model, where you have the same IBM ticker and this gigs. Why are there multiple items in that enumerable in the first place?
I have some 2 cents from a previous job.
One second, Mark, right? I want to address that. Right? How does that make sense? Because in my opinion, that doesn't make sense. Right? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So, I mean, like, we don't always get to, like, pick and choose the data sets we work with, right? So, like, sometimes you just get, like, a junky data set, which has a lot of redundant data. It's like, well, I mean, am I going to go and do an extra step to go and clean it and make it into a nice step first, and then work with what I would consider, like, a proper data set? Or just like, look, this is what I was given. Go do what you need to do and move on.
Great point. And that is what... How do you write a system which functions well when hostile data model is present? If you just pepper over and write first or default, right, your code's behavior is unpredictable. So you can still make a check. And then your system is resilient in face of hostile data. Now someone did a shitty job. You're like, oh, this is random, I'll just take the first one. So now your system will run, but when it will break, you will have no idea why it broke. And that's something I plan to cover in terms of exception handling and thought process around that, right? And that is the #1 reason software sucks, because computers are not like us that they will make sense of the data on demand and do something meaningful. They need exact instructions. So whatever your assumptions are, if your input is garbage, you protect against that garbage in your program. And it sucks that you have to do it, but you better do it. Otherwise, you're going to come back and fix the same thing number of times. Does that make sense? When we covered the exception handling part and how to develop system which runs no matter what you throw at it, we'll go into more detail. What I want you to take back is you have to choose those first or default and single or default very, very carefully. So let's just try to do that first. Because when I read that, it tells me something. right? Your choice of first or default or single or default tells me something. And single or default is very meaningful. First or default is not meaningful. Mark, you were saying?
Yeah, I was going to say at a previous job, we were running the application logic around a bunch of retailers' databases. And so if we wanted to have the aggregate like ledger as far as like what they've bought and what they've sold, we would have these transaction IDs. And they were supposed to be unique, but because they came from a whole bunch of different stores, you know, we needed to verify that this was accurate. And so what we did is we were using Java, like Java, they have a similar concept to Linq called streams. It's a very similar use case. If we had more than one value here, which occurred by accident in several occasions, we would need to raise that. So what we would do is we would catch an exception, and then we would, you know, basically alert the team responsible for the database integrity that this was an issue. So it wasn't actually something that was constrained on the database side because it was coming from multiple sources, but from an accounting standpoint, it had to be reconciled. So
Right.
being able to bubble an error here using like the singular default where you'd want only one item or return an error was something that we had to kind of build our own logic for. We had to write something called a collector, and we had to custom it. So this would be a useful function or a useful feature in that type of capability. So that's kind of, you know, we couldn't verify the database because, you know, it was a homogeneous effort across many different places. And, you know, it was up to us to make sure the application, which was doing the actual reporting, was correct. So that's kind of an example of where that's kind of come in, if that helps kind of illustrate why that might be useful, but just some food for thought.
Definitely, completely agree. And the reason they made Linq, right, is 8 out of 10, you are sort of doing this kind of things. You have a stream of data, you want to slice it and dice it, you want to group it, you want to take one stream and generate another stream. And that's why it's very powerful. And that's why it comes with a lot of method to help you do different sort of scenarios, right? Select, where, group by, first single or default, first or default, any. And every method selection that you do, you should carefully think about it. Anyway, it is almost 1, and all the time is gone. I think I have a brunch plan, so I have to stop. And I think, read my email, guys. I actually wrote down quite a few things that if you try, things will become much more clear on your own, and you will actually have very interesting questions. I think we basically did the exercise from the last email in this session. So let's, we can take some more questions for next 10 minutes. Otherwise, we can sort of stop here. So anyone has any questions about generics from what we showed? Hey, Uma is here. Hey, Uma.
Hello. I'm sorry.
Hey,
I was
can you turn down to see you? It's been a long time.
I'm kind of not comfortable with the video call, so I generally have my video shut down generally. Yeah.
I know, me neither. I never used video call before myself, and now all I do is video calls.
Yeah, I can imagine. My manager is right now biting my head off to start my videos, but well, it's one thing or the another. I always get out of it.
Okay, I didn't realize you were here. Did this session make sense? Do you have any questions?
Not at the moment. It generally makes sense. I mean, I had a similar reaction around the say first or default or single or default thing, because right now in my application, the way I am dealing with, there are a lot of data set issues and stuff like that. And generally, we want it to be a first or default, not a single or default, because the goal is to not have the application just simply stop. So those are the problems. I mean, generally, even though we want to use those methods, the main priority is to not have the application stop in case of data issues. So I imagine.
All right, so this is very interesting to me. It seems like everyone has their tail and it's like, hey, I have some garbage data, so I'm just gonna sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, no, the way it is that in case the situation arises when you say that there should have been, you should have implemented a single or default. So instead of having to just going and use a single or default, the plan where if there is more than one, you throw an exception, we generally do a count check instead of doing a single or default, because we want to throw a specific exception on the application so that the users don't come back. And
that's a great point, and this is where I will want to show you guys. I did not know this would become such a hotly debated topic.
I can imagine.
I have written my own single or default that takes error message as a func.
Yeah, okay.
Then I don't have to, I still get the same benefit of single or default, but my error message exactly says that, hey, in this list, I was expecting 1, I found X, be it 0, be it 5, whatever you have. Because I agree with you. The problem with single or default is when it throws exception, it just says found more than 1 item.
Exactly.
And you have no idea how to troubleshoot it. So that's the exception handling session. We'll go into all those techniques. But the key concept is, if you know if your input data has issues, do not sweep it under the rug. I guarantee you, you will keep fighting that and you will keep supporting that application as long as you work at that company.
Exactly, true. I completely agree to that, yeah.
I was telling Akshat is not here, like at AlphaDyne, I'm moving into other projects is because when I pick up a system, I don't pepper over anything. Even if it takes me 3 months more, I'll keep chipping it away and then it runs and I just don't have to worry about it. Then I take a new project, more interesting project, right? So this is the software engineering part of it. This is not specific to C#. Right? I have like at least 6 or 7 projects going on simultaneously at AlphaDyne. I'm picking up more because once you solve the problem, you solve it so well that it just doesn't fail.
Yeah, true, but unless we are able to achieve that, yeah, that's the reason why we're here at the moment, I guess.
I will say it is a tough problem, right? Sometimes you don't have the authority to spend that additional time, right?
Yeah.
What I have understood is when I didn't have authority, I would sort of work extra or at least find an hour a week to clean it up, even though it's not part of my business deliverable. And it's combined with, if you are really good at technology, cleaning those things up does not take that long. Then what happens? Then it's like, oh, JD wrote the system, it runs, it's always stable. So then you get more opportunity. People start trusting you, saying yes, and they stop questioning your estimates. And then you can, from beginning, you can design a system accounting for error handling better. Right, so when I came to AlphaDyne, when we had this problem with this issue, right, like first 6 months, we just took a lot of time to remove the noise. Another 6 months, system is running like a champ. And now I'll work on some other project. Right? So every character you write, every character, you need to know exactly why you're writing it. not just for your own self, but the poor soul who's going to come and read it 6 months later. And that poor soul, 9 out of 10 is going to be you. So have mercy on yourself. Express the constraint of the business domain extremely clearly in the code. Right? As there's a joke there that I read, like, write code as if the person who's going to maintain the code is a psychopath killer. And you will write good code. Duke has all this puzzled look on his face. I don't know what he's thinking. He thinks I'm just bullshitting.
Yeah, you can't write perfect software. I don't know, man. You gotta use first or default so it doesn't fail.
Well, let's just agree to disagree. It's not about perfect software. It's about writing the most high quality software that you can that does not fail over. And guys on my team, they can speak on my behalf. Our systems that we run at Alpha-Dyne, they don't fail willy-nilly. And if they fail, they tell me exactly why it failed. And that's the difference. And there's a layer, right? There's perfect, like what NASA will write is different than what a JavaScript programmer will write. Right? Now, obviously, you can't spend infinite money to write perfect software, but if you just spend 10% effort on ensuring certain aspect, which I'll cover in a separate session, I'm going to go into exam. I thought about a perfect problem I'm going to assign to all of you, and then I'll say, okay, how do you think about this? So we'll go into more detail then, but you can definitely do better than first or default, 100%, no argument. You can show me all your first or default case and I'll tell you why it doesn't make sense.
Because the data normalization or the data model part was basically not in our hands. That's going to be the biggest reason why one has to default to a first or default. Let's say.
But then you need to start thinking about, hey, who is designing this data model, right? You got to start questioning this thing. Like,
exactly, true.
But then at the end, your data model will outlive every single line of code you write. So software engineering actually starts with data model. We haven't gone into that aspect. You have to first get the data model right. And then application is much easier. Now, granted, a lot of times we get dealt with like very crappy data model, but then onus is on us to make sure we put safeguards around it in the code. Okay. Any other comments? Ritesh, have you used first or default a lot? I'm curious.
Yes.
Okay, and you think it makes sense, or?
No. Singular default makes sense. I agree to it.
Okay. All right. So let's touch base next week. Thanks, everyone. Please look at the last email. Please do the exercises. We have 4 more Linkpad scripts, and I would rather talk about this engineering aspects than syntax aspect. All right.
Yep.
All right. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, JD.
Yep, bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
JD.
Bye.
Thanks.